So for the first time in F1's history, a race has been red flagged 4 times. Yes, that's right, the fourth coming on the slowdown lap as Hulkenberg stopped on track, and a safety car finish. Chaos, confusion at Albert Park, but a familiar look to the podium. Before we get to Matt Kew and Alex Kalinauckas, who is in Australia, let's have a look at the results. Max Verstappen finished first, having never previously won in Melbourne, followed home by Lewis Hamilton, and a familiar third on the podium for Fernando Alonso, his third consecutive finish. A brilliant result for Aston Martin, with Lance Stroll following teammate home in 4th, and a pit lane start to a 5th place finish for Sergio Perez. Lando Norris getting McLaren off the mark with points in 6th, and Nico Hulkenberg has his best result since Austria last year, and also off the mark, Oscar Piastri for McLaren in 8th. Zhou Guanyu scoring points since Monza last year in 9th, and Yuki Tsunoda last in the points in 10th. So how do we tackle this then? Chaos, confusion. You know, there was a motor race going on today. Let's start with racing. Another strong performance from Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Red Bull. Never really in doubt, I think, in terms of pace once he got the lead. But with races like these, you got to keep it clean. And it looks like up front they did. Alex, you are at Albert Park. We'll start with you. What did you make of the win today?
Yeah, it was all rather interesting. There's almost like 3 different aspects to look at it first. There's the initial start where Max Verstappen fights very cleanly with the 2 Mercedes cars. Then there's the race that he utterly dominated, and it was all very boring, and I'm sure he enjoyed that, apart from his weird lock up and off at the penultimate corner at one point. And then there was the red flag chaos and the sort of the farcical scenes. Ultimately, that's what we ended up calling it in my race report. It was pretty weird. It just seemed like, once again, rules were not understood, rules were not easily available, and what was going to go on, and that's not good for F1. But yeah, I think just talking about Verstappen's performance alone, fascinating at the first corner, because George Russell, you know, we'd be talking about it in the paddock. Would he, won't he send it down the inside? Is that Mercedes' only hope? Verstappen didn't get a good start. He admitted that openly in the press conference, just not really sure what went wrong there for him, but he said that every start from there seemed to get better. But he was ahead. He would have made that apex ahead of George Russell, but Russell asked the question, put it upon him, and Verstappen turned out of contact. He did the thing Lewis Hamilton was doing all those times early in 2021, and it seemed like Verstappen perhaps would never do. He turned out of an incident. Then it came to turn 3, fought Hamilton a little bit harder than he did with George Russell. He then was very annoyed on the radio that he appeared to be edged towards the edge of the track, and again, he was right. His wheels were ahead at the apex, but ultimately I think both concluded it was fair racing. That's certainly how Hamilton saw it. He didn't feel he'd been squeezed, but it was just very interesting that Verstappen, willing to do what for so long it seemed like he would never be willing to do, and cede ground. And basically it's because he knew his car was so fast. I mean, look at how he came back by Lewis Hamilton with DRS after the first red flag. It was a no contest. I think Toto Wolff's calling it mind-boggling how fast he was. It was just no contest. So that's why ultimately Verstappen, I don't think Verstappen's suddenly changed. He just knew he was going to win no matter, even if he lost a few places on the opening lap, and it just, you saw that in how the rest of the race played out. He was utterly dominant, and then just had to be an interested spectator when it came to that long wait after the second or third red flag or fourth red flag, whichever one it was.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty robust incident where Hamilton went down the inside, but I didn't think there was any contact. I thought it was pretty fair, but even we saw at the red flag stoppage, Hamilton asking for his front wing to be changed, so maybe there was more to it than I realised. But Matt, what about Sergio Perez starting from the pit lane, finishing 5th with the pace of that Red Bull? Is there almost disappointment that he didn't get on the podium, or on any other day, a driver getting up to 5th from a pit lane start? That's a really spectacular drive. Thanks to Sergio Perez, we actually had some action to watch during the race because he made some fantastic overtakes. What did you make of his performance?
Yeah, it was strong, like you say, Martin, and sort of a neat race of, had that phase of sort of biding his time, where you're looking at the order and thinking, oh, he's still in the teens. What's, you know, come on, pull your finger out a little bit. And then the aggression with which he eventually started passing people through that sort of 8, 9, 10 sequence was incredible. And I think not like over the line where it's, you know, I'm putting a car here and you decide what to do with yours if you want to get through it, but just sort of, you know, having a bit of faith in his other drivers to be sensible, to check their mirrors, and then just building up the inside. I thought was really impressive. And I'll come out in defence of Perez, because I suppose people will look at Verstappen last weekend coming from the back of the grid to play rear gunner in a Red Bull 1-2 and go, why can't Perez do that? And although, yes, the Red Bull DRS, as we've seen, it's extremely potent, it's just track nature, isn't it? There's a lot fewer overtaking opportunities compared to, Jeddah, which is a street track in name only. It's a purpose-built street track that's wide and flowing and, promotes DRS, promotes overtaking. So in the context of basically the track he had around him, I thought it was an assured drive from Perez, and as the rest of the race sort of showed, if it was just enough to keep out the drama and profit thereafter. So good enough, absolutely.
Yeah. Now Alex, can you help me understand Mercedes a bit? Because I feel like I'm already confused over Mercedes.
It's a big German car manufacturer, Martin. They sell lots of high-end saloon cars. Let me
rephrase that. Can you help me understand what's coming out in terms of, we think the car is terrible, and they go and at one point, lead the race with a 1-2, and they talk about how there's a new car concept coming and it's in the wind tunnel already, and this concept has been thrown out the window after qualifying in Bahrain, and now Lewis Hamilton's said after the race today, well, actually, we think we could catch Red Bull by the end of the year. Oh, I mean, that Red Bull is so dominant, though. They got a few seconds ahead and turned it down again today. What? I don't understand what is happening with Mercedes. Is that a good car or bad car? Is it track specific? Can you help me decode that a bit?
Specifically this weekend, it does look like it is track specific. And actually, I would point more to Red Bull losing time because of the nature of the track. I think historically they've not done terribly well here. Look at them last year against Ferrari. They do struggle when it comes to this very smooth track surface and getting the tyres up to temperature, keeping them in the right windows. Look at Max Verstappen, I said it earlier, off the road at turn 13 because he was struggling with his brakes. They were struggling with their brakes all weekend. Look at Perez in qualifying. So I think Red Bull was closer to Mercedes, if that makes sense, by having its own struggles, in inverted commas, because Red Bull are not struggling. And Mercedes, I think just seemed to nail things, get everything right. They got the preparation laps right in terms of nailing qualifying. And speaking to Aston Martin, that's why they feel they ended up ahead in the race, because everything's very, very, very close. So, yeah, you say, is this a terrible car? I think in Mercedes' collective mind it is, because it's not winning. But it's obviously not a terrible car because it's not 10th at the back of the field.
Well, we were denied a battle between George Russell, who is outpacing Lewis Hamilton in qualifying, at least. That would have been a great battle, I think, to watch, but denied that today by reliability. Let's talk Ferrari, let's talk Aston, let's talk Charles Leclerc, actually, because I feel so sorry for him, Matt. That's 5 first-lap retirements now. He can't catch a break, let alone catch a break this season. A title challenge, if it ever existed, is disappearing very fast, and that's going to really hurt again for Charles Leclerc. What did you make of the remaining Ferrari's performance today, Matt?
It was another dismal performance from Ferrari. First, in the context of qualifying, that they're just not a pace match for Red Bull, Mercedes and now Aston Martin, so they've gone from second to the 4th fastest team. And okay, Verstappen had his unreliability here last year, but this is a race that 12 months ago, Leclerc absolutely dominated. Alex and I have had this discussion at the back end of last season about which was the most boring Grand Prix of last year, and I nominated Australia because the way Leclerc just ran away with it. And now to see them down in the mire, retiring, he's called it his worst start to a Formula 1 season. He's only got the caveat of he's done one, not with Ferrari, but worst start, and you can totally understand why. Off the pace. The team, at least, if you take a positive, the team at least are now in alignment with the drivers that this car has a weakness. They need to bring upgrades. It's not just a case of what Mercedes has been doing and refining the setup. They now see that the car's not good enough. And then Sainz was a bit more competitive, but obviously it was an enormous blunder. I know he's calling it the worst penalty he's ever received in F1, but he's whether it's harsh when the field is that bunched up to give him 5 seconds in that specific context, you can perhaps argue, but giving him a penalty for just getting his braking zone all wrong into turn 1 and nerfing around Fernando Alonso, I'm afraid there he's banged to rights. And up until then, it was an assured drive. Again, with the limitations of that car, it was good, but not spellbinding for Alex and his colleague JBL, who obviously consider driver ratings. But it just that incident, and obviously Leclerc's retirement, it's a nice capsule of where Ferrari is at the moment. It's fundamentally disappointing and underachieving, and it's you look back on certain elements of 2022 now and think, is this another 5-year wait before their next title opportunity? You obviously you don't know that at this stage, but just look back and when they were squandering points last season, you just think that car and those drivers were ready to win the title before the team was, and sort of now the car's taking a step back and driver errors are creeping in again.
Yeah, Alex, what do you think about the penalty with Carlos Sainz for spinning around Fernando Alonso? It was a turn 1 incident. It was after a red flag restart. We've been told, we've seen so many times, first lap incidents. In fact, turn 1 incidents are not punished. It's a racing incident. What do you think of it? Because we're recording this quite soon after the flag today, so I don't know if you had a chance to catch up with the drivers or been on any team debriefings yet where you are in Australia, but he was furious, saying that I want to speak to the stewards and give my case. I don't think drivers need to. I just want a sport that's well regulated, that we have some decision makers. This isn't a debate, this isn't. I don't think we need to get the drivers in every time saying, what did you think? How do you feel? There should be rules and we stick to them. But he has a point. In the past, Formula One has said, we're going to talk to the drivers first. Well, what would they have said to Charles Leclerc to get his side of the story? So it seems like a penalty, but should it have been?
Yeah, I think if you take it in isolation in terms of the driving, it is a penalty, because they don't automatically just let turn 1 be a free pass. Otherwise, if it was a 1-lap sprint, as we potentially very nearly got with this red flag fast at the end here, one driver would just punt another one off and assume they get scot-free. So it is still policed and it is still adjudicated. But so on the face of it, yeah, 5 seconds deserved. But all those extenuating additional circumstances you mentioned, Martin, the fact that lap 1, turn 1 things they're adjudicated less severely, didn't seem to have been applied. And I know that this goes back to the debate about how long decisions take, and I understand I get your point there, Martin, but I disagree. I'd rather have the right outcome in all circumstances, no matter how long it takes. And I think the stewards, there is so many precedents of waiting to hear from drivers, and really recently, remember Sergio Perez about the safety car infraction in Singapore. Well, he was clearly banged to rights on both occasions. Like that should have been a slam dunk penalty, but that he was allowed to argue his case. So Sainz is right. At the very least, they should have listened to him. That's my position. That bad driving, Carlos, but I think he can feel hard done by it. And it was interesting that Fernando Alonso in the press conference, where Fernando seemed more concerned with the press conference wrapping up quickly so that he could go and catch his flight out of Australia. Fair enough. At one point gesturing about that his answer was not to give any words, but to suggest he wanted to get to the airport. Fair enough. Said he thought the penalty for Carlos was harsh, and I do suspect, however, that he's only saying that because he was reinstated to his 3rd place, and it all came to nothing in the end. But also that's another essential part of this argument. Nothing bad happened to Alonso as a result of Sainz's driving. So does he deserve a penalty? It's quite the quandary.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that was ever a penalty. Racing incident for me, yeah, so it was a mistake. But ultimately, nobody was really affected. But people were affected in terms of, Sainz lost out. What I thought was good, actually, is when they crossed the line, commentary were able to, that the timing sheets were updated straight away. So, okay, so Carlos has finished 12th. I thought that was good. We weren't waiting a long time to find out the final finishing order. Some of those beneficiaries of his 5-second penalty, which, of course, lots of people benefited from because they were all bunched up. It was a safety car restart. McLaren, a stronger performance, Matt, this weekend. And again, a team that I need your expert help on, because there were times today when we saw them not being able to pass, and yet other times when Lando was holding off a much faster Red Bull with Perez. So is the McLaren stronger now? Have they improved it? What's going on there?
I'm going to put it down to sort of just the midfield melting pot. I don't think they've fundamentally turned a corner. They're still talking about, the Baku upgrade is the first in a long line of new parts and bits needed to make them a competitive team. With this ambition, they still have to be 4th fastest. I think different tracksuit, different teams. When it's that tightly contested, what was it? 3 tenths separating 7 cars or something in qualifying. That's how sort of that's how tightly packed it is at the minute. So you just have a natural toing and froing, even if they did have the car in a better window. And again, the drama that goes on has profited them. Norris was not the sixth fastest car, and obviously Piastri, the late cheer for him getting back into points, and 8 points. So McLaren finally off the mark this season in a good way, but I don't think in the same way that Russell is not saying, right, we've got second place, therefore we don't need this new car concept that we've been talking about, and we've turned a corner. I think McLaren need to take exactly the same attitude, which is this might be the exception rather than the rule. They haven't suddenly unlocked or found a silver bullet and are going to be in this sort of area of the pack for the rest of the season. I think a bit more of a flash in the pan. So I'm chucking in so many cliches, I'm getting myself confused.
Let's talk about Alpine. A huge loss today. Bits of Alpine carbon fibre scattered around the track as both cars were out. Gasly's a couple of points away from a race ban. Alex, have you caught up with the team after the event today? They must be absolutely spewing, as our Australian friends would say, over so many points being lost. What's the result of Alpine and any stewards investigation?
Yeah, as we record now, no updates. Yeah, I think first of all, just to say, I mean, Pierre Gasly was fantastic for most of the race. Absolutely tremendous. I really thought he drove exceptionally well, and let's not forget that. But it's a bit like how you can't just ignore what happened at the very end there, and it just went in too hot into turn one, that massive lock-up, and then the rejoining. It's almost, I don't even know what to say there, because where was he supposed to go? But equally, did he not think that there would be a car alongside him? It should have been fairly obvious. Actually, it actually made me think back to Leclerc at turn 3 on lap 1. Did he not think there'd be a car on the inside? That's pretty poor from Leclerc there. And Gasly, the result ultimately just destroying 2 Alpines and destroying their races. So the team is very, very, very disappointed.
Of course, a third and a fourth, an amazing result for Aston and Team Silverstone as well. Again, just continuing a brilliant season, really strong. How are the team feeling coming out of Australia?
They're very happy. I mean, there was at one point where they were about to be extremely sad because of Alonso being turned around by Sainz, because of Lance Stroll ending up in the gravel at turn 3, but they very much feel in fact, this is Mike Crack's words. He said, "We didn't steal anything. The rules are the rules." They went back to what they did at Silverstone in 2022. The fact that the red flag was thrown before even Verstappen had reached the end of the first sector line, they take it back to safety car 2 line, which is down towards the first corner. So it's just the way it is. That's that essentially there's no way to establish a proper order. So they have to go back to the grid order, and that's what they did at Silverstone. Regardless of the sort of the lines there. But Haas are very unhappy about that. They've protested the result. That's being heard as we speak. They're understandably furious because Nico Hülkenberg was up to 4th in all the chaos where the Astons were off the road. But another excellent weekend for Aston. It's just that they weren't leading the way behind Red Bull because of, as we talked about earlier in qualifying, the tiny little details. In fact, I think Mike Crack was like a little gust of wind here and there. The fact that coming out of these 90-degree corners here, when you step on the gas, suddenly a driver can lose a lot of momentum. So any slight error, it really came down to fine margins. Mercedes nailed it, they didn't. And what's really interesting is that if you take Red Bull out of the equation, there's a hell of a fight behind, because I don't think Ferrari are exactly out of that picture with Mercedes and Aston.
Yeah, and it comes through when you hear Lewis Hamilton in the post-race interviews saying, "Oh yeah, we're up there fighting with Aston Martin," and you think, well, they've come a long way down when they're celebrating the fact that they're fighting with Aston Martin. Here's a driver who I feel so badly for, Matt. And let's talk Williams. Even since testing, when we were making these videos in testing, Matt, you said, look, there's something about the Williams. It just looks like a balanced car. It might not be the absolute fastest everywhere, but it looks like it's drivable. And once again we see the Williams doing really well today. But Alex Albon, oh man, he could have been on for such a good finish. Could he have kept up that pace before he crashed out? What did you make of that crash, by the way? Was that sort of self-inflicted, and what caused that, and what do you make of kind of Williams' opportunities this year if that pace is real?
Albon was an unfortunate driver error. I've been through, what the teams have said, what they're reporting. Maybe there was a damage or damper, but no, he gets it wrong over the curb and loses the rear. I think comes away sort of lucky, I think, not to have a bigger impact. By the time he scrubs off a lot of speed and noses into the barrier, he obviously does both ends, so front wing off completely, and you can see as he comes to rest, the rear wing's pretty crumpled and flexing, and obviously that sort of sets up that key chain of events, doesn't it? Where the FIA called a safety car from all the gravel that's been dragged onto the track, and obviously what that does with Russell, giving him a more expensive, in inverted commas, pit stop, and Max and Lewis changing their tyres for free. But it was a decent performance otherwise from Williams. What that car could do in the middle sector. Okay, that's courtesy of it basically not having the downforce as it should, so it's extremely slippery, cuts through the air nicely, and that's what we've seen at speed traps in Saudi Arabia and whatever. But it is, a competitive car, and as John mentioned in the previous video, it's right that Jos Capito, the old team principal, should be putting out congratulations messages on LinkedIn, because as much as there is a new face in the door with James Vowles, it's the predecessor's work that's established it. Obviously Formula One teams take a long time to steer their course. They're like big old container ships, so it's right that the previous regime get some praise for what is a competitive car. Obviously Williams had this slight dilemma that if it's slightly too competitive for its own good, then they get sucked into a development race, which Vowles has said he doesn't really want to be in. He wants to target longer term success, so almost writing off this season. But it is a competitive car, and okay, it's bad to say this after Albon's lost the rear and smeared it into the wall, but it looks a stable car. It doesn't have the balance inconsistencies that particularly stymied the drivers last year. So if you're a rookie coming in, a la Logan Sargent, it's probably quite a nice car to learn in. But he obviously had a difficult race, culminating in the incidents we all remember are the Alpines wiping each other out and Alonso getting punted round, but at the back of the shot you can see Logan Sargent messing up his braking zone and punting into De Vries in what was not a very well executed race. By the end of it seemed a bit like a glorified test session almost, with the pit stops and the strategy that they're executing on that side of the garage. But that aside, that FW45 is, again, a really tightly packed midfield. But last season, Alex and I could have summed it up in a sentence, said, back marker, slowest car. And that's what they were anticipating coming into the season. But the fact it's nowhere near that emphatic is a sign of a good improvement. The only caveat now is that they have no technical director to lead what to do with the car. They've got a chief designer standing in, and they really need to restructure that division.
Interestingly, here in the Albert Park paddock, there's a visual representation of how Williams ended up at the foot of the Constructors' Championship, in that all the tents are together, and then there's one actually a good 3 or 4 several hundred metres further away, which is Williams behind the TV pen. It's like added punishment for them.
Ouch. Right, we'll stay with you, Alex. Final question, because you are there in the paddock. What's the reaction been like to just the way that it finished today? It was chaos. We used the word farcical in our Autosport.com headline, and that's the right word, because we're past 75% race distance. Something happened that causes a red flag. I think Formula One fans are happy to go, okay, 2-3 laps left, 1 lap left, whatever, red flag, that's the end. We seem to be lurching from one rules debacle to another. Kind of funny that Michael Massey was back in the paddock this weekend, or he was at least in Australia, and watching things. And I mentioned this on the Autosport podcast, that sometimes Formula One is the sport I love to hate, and it just frustrates the life out of me sometimes that fans might come in or turn their TV on a Sunday morning, and there's just a ridiculous situation with the rules. It frustrates me so much because there's so much to love about F1 at the minute. You're there in the paddock. What's the reaction been to just how long it took to decide how should we end this thing today?
Yeah, it's very much split opinion. I think if you look at all of the incidents, Max Verstappen, even going back to the first red flag, is why was that a red flag? It could have been covered under a safety car. Fernando Alonso saying similar things. But yeah, the sort of the delay at the end, it's just it makes you think that they don't know the rules, that they're trying to sort of make things up on the spot, and there's a clear precedent with Silverstone 2022. So why weren't they explaining that much quicker to everybody? Because the half an hour for a 1 lap rolling finish, it shouldn't feel like it shouldn't have taken that long. But equally, everyone's got to remember there's huge sums of money for these points. Like, no wonder Haas are protesting. They could have been fourth. They might never be fourth in this season again. So it's really serious stuff. That's why things do take a little bit longer than might be ideal. But the big sort of philosophical question is, should a red flag have been thrown at the end when Kevin Magnussen's wheel came off? Which, by the way, very poor driving from Magnussen. What on earth was going on there to hit the wall coming out of turn 2? But I've actually come full circle. Our chief editor, Kevin Turner, produces the magazine every week, Autosport magazine. I think back to Monza 2022, where it finished under a safety car, and I was, if that had been a red flag, Leclerc could have had his chance. And I was so excited by that, and I was so excited by the fact that Lewis Hamilton would get one more stab at Max Verstappen, purely because it was a more interesting ending, or it definitely was a more interesting ending than what it would otherwise have been with Verstappen running away. But having seen that restart and that chaos and that debacle, I don't know. I feel like I've come full sway, and I'm sort of like I'm feeling more against it now. But then the flip side to that is, look, the situation is the same for everyone. The drivers could have driven better. Logan Sargent couldn't have, ploughed into the back of De Vries. Gasly couldn't have gone off. It's not an easy one. But I think right now I'm coming down on the side of, if it gets to that situation, just call the race. If it's got to be a red flag, that's it. Verstappen wins it while he's lined up at the end of the pit lane.
And I know there's a lot of pressure on that moment of crossing the line, but if it's a red flag, it's a red flag, as you say. As long as the right thing happens, that's going to rumble on. We want to hear from you in the comments below what you thought about today and the 4 red flags, and what you thought about how the way that it was handled and the performances out there today. Leave a comment below. We love to read all of those. One of the things we did get wrong last time is we were watching the world feed when Sergio Perez won last time out, and the world feed showed just a very unhappy Jos Verstappen kind of ignoring him post-race, and we mentioned that. Subsequently, footage has come out of them shaking hands, and Jos Verstappen, Max's father, giving him congratulations on winning. We mentioned he didn't, so we got that wrong. Very happy to correct that. All thanks to you in the comments below pointing that out. So we need you to leave a comment below and tell us what you thought about today's action and the things that we have discussed. Formula One now goes into this weird break because of no China, and so it returns at the end of April, but we will be here throughout that mini break with lots more videos and content hopefully for you to enjoy. Thank you very much for watching and subscribing to the channel for more videos just like this, and we'll see you on the next one.